Why does it matter? I asked Level during breakfast. They complain because they suffer. The rain will come sooner or later. It's terrible that some will die, that the year will be worse. But we can raise taxes in the provinces that weren't affected. We can rebuild the herds there and give them to those in the inner circle who were harmed. The rain will come eventually. After all, we are bringing in water and distributing it. We are also handing out food. They can see that my father is helping them, and the rain will fall regardless. Time will pass and they'll forget about the drought, just as they'll forget about this prophetess. I wish you were right, Level said, looking gloomily into his cup of nut infusion. Tell me, what is the most valuable thing we've given to the Amitraji? Us, I laughed. He slapped me, but he smiled too. We gave them freedom, I said, becoming serious. Is there a greater treasure? They can interact with each other, ignoring the castes, and no one forces them to do so. The old families still cling to their castes if they wish. We gave them the law. Everyone can choose their path, but they can farm the land or trade, or join the army. Everyone, he asked mockingly. So how is it that all the Hyruks still farm the Sindar's fields? None of them like trading? They have nothing to trade. But once, leaving the village meant death for them, and now they can go where they want and do what they want. So why don't they, young tiger? Because they don't know how, I snapped, growing angry. You are twisting words again. Of course, if for hundreds of years anyone could kill them because they were the lowest caste and no different from slaves, it will take a long time for them to catch up. But as far as I know, the Sindars now have to pay them. They are imperial teachers in the ruler settlements, maybe their children. Oh, and I'm sure the Sindars are happier as a result. I think so, now that they can grow richer. After paying the people and giving up taxes, the rest of the profit is theirs. Before, they had nothing. I assure you, they knew how to grow rich even then. They had their ways. The priests didn't keep everything in those red towers of theirs. So, we've established that we've given nothing to the Hyruks. And what we have given to the Sindars? You know very well that we haven't finished yet. It's only been 3 generations. We are trying to heal the whole country. You should have more respect for what my father, your ruler, has achieved. Ho ho, the young tiger will accuse me of treason. It's like if I hit you, Tohimon, every time I don't know what to say. I only asked why the Tiger Empire should fear one crazy woman. Aren't there plenty of prophets of strange cults shouting in the squares? Are we that weak? A few weeks of heat is all it takes? She's different, Tohimon. Wherever she appears, her followers remain. They don the cased clothes and rebuild the red towers. They donate their lifetime savings to the temple. Why? Not much is known. The rituals are secret. Her speeches are just the usual threats, old tales about the underground mother, whom her children must feed, and the same vision of a new unified world. No divisions, no injustice, and so on and so on. There are some new things that she seems to have added to the old faith, but that doesn't explain anything. What matters is that she gives out water and food, and according to the reports sent by officials, she's giving people well springs. What do you mean, giving well springs? Leverbelt opened a thick tube and pulled out a stack of scrolls. Look here, the Kishlak of Kahirdim in the Vulture Mountains. She struck a stone in the middle of a bazaar with her fist and then toppled it. A spring gushed out from the underneath. It's small, but it's been flowing for a month and still gives water. The same thing happened on the outskirts of Bauzabad. She left behind a spring that gushes from a rock wall, and in a suburban bazaar, she incited the crowd to seize goods from the merchants. There wasn't much, but she later distributed the durra to women and children. She scooped the grain from a barrel with a wooden bucket and handed it out. Here it is. More than 5 times 50 bushels. Over a binhon of dura from 1 barrel. Then she stops in caves or cellars and heals the sick. I have reports of healed fractures, of removing fiery ulcers, curing rot of a breath, and even marsh fever. So she's a doer. We can arrest her. You shouldn't speak faster than you can think, Tohimon. Arrest her for quenching the people's thirst? For doing what we can't? Maybe we should plug those springs too, and then hang the healed ones. The thing is, as soon as the recovered people are back on their feet, they start raving about the underground mother, give away the wealth, and rebuild the red towers. I sat in silence for a while, playing with my cup. I'm starting to lose track of your lessons, Levelbelt. I don't know what you are trying to teach me. What's the answer? My teacher sighed. The time of ready-made answers found in scrolls and codes is slowly ending for you. I'm only teaching you to think now. To use all the knowledge the House of Steel had tried to put into your empty head for so many years. Because the time may come when I'll be asking you what to do, young tiger, and you will have to give me the answer. But before that happens, it's time for you to know the world. What do you mean? You must leave the palace. Without retinues, tiger carriage, escorts, and the whole artificial world you carry with you like a turtle carries its shell. It's time for you to come out of a shell. You are to be a tiger, not a turtle. And so the time came when I received the clothes of an ordinary Sindar, a dark yellow tunic with black trim, loose trousers, and felt boots with woven leather soles. I was surprised that they were of slightly better quality and richer than what I would wear every day. I was taught how ordinary people, like a young man who had recently passed the imperial exams, should behave, how to greet others, and what was appropriate in the city for someone like that, and what was not. And one morning, the teacher introduced me to the man who was to become another important companion in my life. He was tall, thin, and looked as if he had been woven from tangled, sun-dried leather straps. He wore the veteran's braid, and I noticed that he had the tattoo of a 14th Timon, known as the Thunder Timon, on his shoulder. He was a bit younger than Levelbelt, but to me, he seemed ageless like a horse. His name was Hone, son of Wormuther, and he came from the Stream clan. He greeted me with restraint, clasping his fist with his other hand and briefly touching it to his forehead. "Toimon, my lord," he muttered. "Don't expect any bowing, young tiger," declared Levelbelt. "Hone's job is to keep you alive and well on the city streets, and bring you back to the palace. And that's all. He's not your servant, but a guardian. From now on, you can leave through the secret exit and walk around Maranhar, but Hone must always accompany you. There's no exception to this. He'll be teaching you about the world, but no one out there can even think that he's your servant. Officially, he's called Tenzin Birtalai, and you're to address him as Sitar Tenzin, never anything else. You will be known as Arjuk Hatarmal, but Hone will call you Arjuk, Arki, or even Redhead, as if he were someone older or more important. Sometimes he'll speak in a dismissive tone or mock you. It's all part of the disguise, just like the tunic or the false names." The first time I was to leave the village of the clouds, I was excited, but deep down I was also terrified. We wandered through long, cobbled corridors lit only by small oil lamps in niches. All we could hear were our footsteps and a strange murmur far away. I asked Hone what that sound was. "The city," he simply replied. After a long while, we reached winding stairs and then a door. Hone, whom I was now to call Sitar Tenzin, took a key from his sleeve, tied to a leather strap, and unlocked it. We stood in a small, windowless room. My guide carefully turned the key, then opened another door. We entered another storage room, filled with barrels and crates. After passing through yet another door, we climbed some stairs and, after brushing aside a bedded curtain, we entered a cramped, unremarkable office where an old, hunched man leaned over a desk, scratching something with a red pen on a small scroll. On the shelves lay hundreds of scrolls and document cases, wooden, leather, and painted with resin. The old man paid us no attention, as if we weren't there at all. He dipped his pen into the diluted ink and continued to draw neat rows of letters. "This is the scribe's office," Holmes said. "It's located on Rope Workman Street, in the Merchant District. The scribe's name is Shilgan Hatyezit, and you must remember that in case you ever have to return home on your own." "Shilgan Hatyezit," I repeated. "The scribe with an office on Rope Workman Street in the Merchant District." Shilgan Hatyezit reached for a bone seal and rolled it over the parchment. To him, we were invisible. "What is he doing?" "He writes official documents for people. Petitions, applications, and statements. Also private letters, wills, divorce papers, and the like. That's his job." Hone pushed me aside the curtain made of leather thongs and stepped out onto the street, and I followed him. I nearly stumbled as I was overwhelmed by the sunlight, noise, crowds, and chaos. I had seen large groups of people before, but military units or crowds of worshippers from a distance resembled more of a flower bed. Here, people were literally swarming. I looked at the cramped, blocky houses of the yellowish color of a dried clay, crowding one upon another, the colorful clothes, the piles of goods displayed in front of the entrances, the fluttering sign banners, and I felt dizzy. It was dirty and noisy. We pushed our way through the people sitting in the arcades, smoking pipes or sipping drinks. We waded through heaps of fruits piled up there. We maneuvered between stacks of clay pots or pushed our way through the sun-drenched crowd. No one made way for us, no one helped us pass. We had to push through by force, endure curses, and put up with shoves. I smelled the stench of sweat, mixed with the aroma of roasting meat on grills and the spices added to the green Kebiric wine. The city both smelled and reeked. It was both fascinating and frightening, alluring and repulsive. I only remembered the chaos and the crowd, and the overwhelming feeling that no one was paying attention to me, mixed with a terrible fear that I would be recognized any moment. The crowd gave the impression that everyone was moving in every direction at once. I also noticed that some people were sick or bore the marks of past illnesses. They were missing teeth, had scars, some were missing a leg or an arm, sometimes they had twisted hands or festering sores. After we had walked a bit, I felt terribly tired and wanted to go back to the village of clouds, change clothes and sit in the garden. I told Holmes this, but he only snorted. "You haven't seen the city yet, Archie. You need to get used to it. This is life, this stench, this noise and these people. In your garden you only dream. You need to wake up." So we continued walking through the streets, and I grew dizzy from the clamor, the heat, and soon from exhaustion. "When you're tired, you can sit somewhere in the shade on the ground, but it will be stuffy and crowded there. Everyone wants to sit in the shade. Other passerby will kick and bump into you. It's different if you have some money. Then you can find a tavern, sit there, have a drink, and rest comfortably on a stool. But that costs money. Just like every fruit, every piece of roasted turtle, everything you see costs money. In the city, you pay constantly and for everything, even for every sip of water. That man over there, with a strange container on his back, is selling water. The next time we go out, you'll get some copper coins, roughly a dirham. That's about a day's wage for a carpenter. If you want to buy something or eat, you'll need to pay attention to prices and check if you can afford it. Remember, since the draft started, the most expensive thing in the city is quenching your thirst. Even so, things are still relatively normal in the capital." After a while, even Hone was panting, and we sat down in the shade in the front of some dim establishment on hard wooden chairs, and the fat innkeeper brought us cups of nut-infused drink. Why did we sit here, Sita Tenzin? Because the Tomcats has good drinks, much worse than what you usually drink, but you'll manage to swallow it. But you paid half a tigric. Drinks are cheaper at that other inn. For the same coins, we could have gotten a cup of spiced beer along with a drink. How do you know? He frowned. The prices were written in the chalk on the shutter, Sita Tenzin, I noted. Later, I started enjoying trips to the city. We walked through the streets, occasionally sitting in the taverns, strolling through the markets and squares. Home generally allowed me to go where I wanted, only objecting when I decided to go to certain neighborhoods. It's too dangerous there, he would say curtly. I liked watching people and listening to their conversations. I looked out for exotically dressed foreigners and felt joy when I saw a man in Chironese tunic pushing his way through the crowd, with clan embroideries on his sleeves and a knife at his side. I also enjoyed wandering aimlessly, walking through the market, weighing a Kabirik saber in my hand, buying a roasted squid from a street vendor and washing it down with a gourd of spiced beer, haggling over a piece of beds, then giving it to the first pretty girl I met. However, I was wise enough not to approach women in caste robes with a tattoo on their forehead. Men aren't allowed to speak to them without being asked, Hone noted. Their relatives may beat you up or someone might stab you in the crowd. He scolded me harshly a few times when I wanted to go to some suspicious place. Nothing will happen to you, he said. Not to you, since I am here. But they will try to harass you, and I will have to kill them. In that way, you are sentencing them to death. And that's senseless cruelty. I thought he was only bragging. But one day I was robbed. I didn't even notice it. We were passing through the market. Hone, walking behind me, suddenly turned sharply. I heard a shout and saw that my guardian was gripping the wrist of a scrawny youth with a rat-like face and red eyes, holding a purse that he had somehow cut from my belt. The thief let out a shrill, high-pitched scream and slashed at Hone's hand with a thin blade that suddenly appeared in his other hand. He didn't succeed. Hone just as quickly pulled his hand back, and the boy nearly severed his own wrist. As we left, pushing through the crowd, the youth was writhing on the ground in the middle of a gathering crowd, howling like a wounded dog, and blood was spurting from his slashed hand onto the sand. As a result, Tenzin took possession of my recovered purse. You'll spend this day without a coin, redhead, and maybe you'll learn to be more careful. That little rat is paying for your carelessness with his life. But it's just a hand, I noted. It was the hand he noticed because it hurts, and because he cut it himself. Hone growled and discreetly slipped the blade, the size of a small leaf, back into the sheath that hung around his neck like an amulet. It's hard for me to think about Maranhar of my youth now because that city is gone and may never return. That's why I remember. I have to carry that city inside me along with everything else. Along with my unknown country, Kiranen, my entire clan, the village of clouds, Aina, my father, my brothers, my mother and Levabel. There's so much of it. So much has burned. Maranhar. Back then it was alive. It was vulgar, noisy and loud, but cheerful like a prostitute. You could buy and sell anything here, and merchant caravans from all over the world would be seen. There was dancing, dice games, green wine and ambrija. Until the arrival of a hot, dark blue night, the streets were teeming with people. It was quieter in the residential district. There, songs of birds could be heard. I used to go there sometimes to look at the white domes of palaces and the lush green of inner gardens. I liked to steal a glance at the temple of Dalija, surrounded by a garden, wherein the pavilion sat naked, long-haired priestesses, as beautiful as nymphs, selling their tattooed bodies for a gold shekel to benefit the temple. I would look at their slender thighs decorated with colorful flowers and leaves, and their fruit-like breasts, and feel my desire shoot up like an old tree struck by lightning. But I said nothing to Hone, and he also remained silent. Yet, I often wondered how to get a gold shekel. I preferred the maze-like streets of the merchant and port districts. The river port reeked terribly back then. Ships, barges, and galleys sometimes stood dozens of paces from the piers, and the crew had to descend to the decks using ladders, while goods were carried through the thick mud covered by a cracked crust. In the muck, waste rotted, and millions of flies bred. During this walk, I often heard about the fire of the desert, Nahel Ifrisia, and about the wrath of the old gods, and about the cursed foreign dynasty that had brought punishment, wrath, and plagues upon the empire. When I heard these whispers, I was overcome with fear and a sense of impending misfortune. Whatever was happening, the prophetess' name kept returning in rumors, persistently, like a counterfeit coin. When flies swarmed the city, I heard people say, Nahel said the flies would come, that they would eat out the eyes of the enemies of underground mother. They bred from sins against the codex of the earth, from indulgence, from commerce, from impurity, everyone for themselves, but nothing for the mother, and it will only get worse. The merchant district, however, thrived on trade, the freedom of travel, and the liberties our laws provided. There, the rumors about the prophetess' miracles were repeated with reluctance and fear. There, people didn't say that everything will return to the old ways, bowl of Dura for everyone and the code of the earth. The tyranny's laws will end. It will be like days of our ancestors. The priests will restore order and the rains will return. And if they did, it was with dread. The people walking in the bazaars were free and didn't long for the return of the red towers. So in the streets of the merchant districts, I felt more at ease. Since I had started slipping away to the city, I also began to see the village of clouds differently. It still seemed to me that it was the best place on the earth, my home, but I began to have unsettling suspicion that, perhaps, it really was the best place on earth, and that the homes of other people were not merely smaller versions of it, but it didn't resemble it at all. I began to understand the world better. When I listened to reports about goods, tariffs, and harvests, I envisioned baskets of red dura, heaps of fruit, bunches of long onions, and herds of red oxen bellowing in pens. I could comprehend what 5 galleys loaded with the hides of a timon or infantry meant. And I realized that the world was vast. And the rest of the world was filled with the scent of hyena. Her hair, her long legs flashing like scissors in the slit of her dress, and this also crowded my head, which became as busy as the largest bazaar in Maranhar.